Hello everyone! League of Legends is a team game. In the Summoner's Rift there are 10 players with 10 different champions, but only team play can help you win games. In low elo, where players don't fully estimate their champion's potential, good team composition is mostly a matter of chance. So we launched this series to help you understand what champion to pick to be useful for your team and not depend on luck. In this introductory episode we shall discuss types of team compositions and how to set them up, so let's get started. To assemble a balanced team, you need to understand the team composition principles. So let's start with some trivial things. All the champions in League of Legends are divided into two categories: those who deal physical and those who deal magic damage. Physical damage is countered by armor and magic by magic resistance. Your team setup should have both damage sources, so that enemies can't counter it by simply buying defense items of one type. Of course, you might win even with a full AD or full AP setup. In this case, you need for example Vladimir's ultimate in an AP setup and the Black Cleaver on one or two champions in an AD setup. But it's definitely going to be harder, so if you have enough magic damage on your team, pick a champion with physical damage. Besides, you need to take into account what kind of damage your champions deal: burst, sustain or area of effect. Assassins and some mages deal burst damage. It's effective against squishy targets like marksmen, mages, supports or other assassins. ADCs and a few mages like Cassiopeia have sustained damage. This damage is dealt over time in small amounts and is good against tanks. As for your AoE and poke damage, it's common for mages. It's good for sieging or any other positional plays when you need to zone enemies away from your team to take an objective. You don't need all these damage types on your team, but it's important to choose the right type to counter your enemies. For example, if enemies have several tanks, pick Vayne for an ADC role. And if your enemies have no tanks at all, but only mages and fighters, it's better to take Jhin. His fourth shot and curtain call were great against squishy targets. You also need a balance between melee and ranged champions. Even though melee champions have several advantages over the ranged ones, they also have some disadvantages. Firstly, they are vulnerable to area of effect damage and crowd control, as they have to be near each other while focusing the same target in a fight. Secondly, sieging turrets doesn't come easy for them. Full range teams also have some cons. To deal damage they need to choose a good position, as they are quite squishy. And to take a good position they need a front line with tanky champions. If they have none, positioning and dealing damage will get quite complicated, which means champions' potential won't be fully unlocked. Now, champions can not only deal or tank damage, but also provide utility for their teams. Shields, heal, crowd control, mobility and so on are utility abilities. Of course, you'd like all champions on your team to deal damage, but high damage doesn't always equal kills. Vladimir is a strong mage with AoE damage, but he has no gap closer abilities. Pick Lulu, Karma or Sivir and you'll make a mobile and deadly combo. Or, sometimes you need time to deal your full damage, and time can be provided by crowd control abilities. For example, Morgana's Binding can root a target, giving Vel'Koz or Miss Fortune enough time to cast their ultimates. If your enemies have such assassins as Talon or Zed, pick Kindred or Tahm Kench. No matter how much damage enemy assassins deal, it won't be enough to kill your carry. If your enemies have a lot of AoE damage, take Soraka or Karma and so on. Combining damage and utility makes your setup more effective than a full damage composition. And finally, two more things you need to consider are your team's win condition and power spike time. All champions have their power spikes at different game stages. Some are strong early on, like Lee Sin, Renekton or Udyr, but then their game impact decreases during the course of the game. Others have their power spike in the mid-game, like Ezreal or assassins like Zed or Talon. Yet others realize their full potential only in the late game, but their impact is huge. Such champions usually have extremely weak early game. Amongst them are Vayne, Kog'Maw and other hyper carries. You won't always manage to make a balanced setup which is strong at all the game stages. However, you should try to achieve it. If you pick too many late game champions, let's say Gangplank, Nocturne, Veigar, Vayne and Soraka, you might not even survive the laning phase. Your champions are so weak early on that enemies will take all their early objectives and have a huge gold lead. Such a game might end before your champions reach their power spikes. Sure, you might win even with an unbalanced setup, which aims at a certain game stage, early, mid or late game, which is really difficult in the current meta. When assembling your team, think what setup you choose for what game stage and play accordingly. A wrong setup realization is a common mistake for beginners. They take late game champions but start fighting against strong early game champions from the opening minutes. And guess what? They lose. If you pick Gangplank and bet on the late game, try to make your early game as safe as possible. Focus on farming and gain gold for 2 or 3 core items. As soon as you buy them, you can start forcing fights, as you will deal sufficient damage. If you have Renekton on top, take Lee Sin or Xin Zhao as your jungler. A couple of early level 2 ganks could end in a destroyed enemy turret and Renekton with 2 kills and a gold lead, which makes him almost unstoppable. Group up and keep forcing fights while Renekton is strong. Do not let your enemies make it to the late game. Well, I guess that should be enough for the introduction. In the future episodes, we shall analyze basic team compositions, such as 4-1 and 1-3-1, and other teamfight, catch and siege setups more thoroughly. And we'll also discuss their pros and cons. So until then, thank you so much for watching this video, assemble your setups wisely, and as always, good luck in your solo queue.